May it bring the illumination of wisdom where there is ignorance, understanding where there is mistrust, hope where fear abounds. And may the light of the chalice make more visible the love that holds us all. And thus we gather. There's an old joke about heaven and hell. Perhaps you've heard it. It goes, heaven is when the British are the police, the Germans are the auto mechanics, the Swiss make the watches, and the Italians and French do the cooking. The humor and teeth of the joke, as well as the stereotyping, begins when we flip it over and we know that hell is when the Germans are the cops, the British are the cooks, the French make the cars, and the Italians run the clocks. You get my point. Not that I'm a bigot. The subtext of the quote is that different cultures, different groups of people have different strengths, right? They have different quirks, they have different dispositions. And to extend that image a bit further today, so do world religions. So we have had discussions in the theology group, which we had yesterday. We talk about the world religions some. And I made a note to myself in one of them that I should do something on this. And that sort of sat in the back of my brain. And so today I thought I would pull together, it also involves a conversation I had with my dad before he passed, about what the underlying psychology and wisdom of each of the world religious traditions are. So I want to look at the core of what they offer and see if we can take the best of the world religions. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. In a word, the great end is to awaken the soul to excite and cherish spiritual life. In this time in our nation's history, let's hold that thought. Let's be a people. Let's be an institution that holds up the truth and the pursuit of truth with freedom, with love at the center, with the openness to know that we all approach this in our own way. May we be that people. May we be as strong a voice as we can. And I invite you to hold that and that calling, tracing way back to the 1800s, the 1820s in your hearts. And know that no real spiritual truth comes in chains, is bound in words. It comes free form in our hearts and minds from the free and responsible truth search for truth and meaning. Let's hold that truth here. May we be the embodiment of an institution that sat here and on the green for over 300 years. In the introduction, I had a car ride with my dad, and we had some discussions in our theology discussion group here that sort of made me think, oh, like I should do something on the world religions in totality. But it really kicked a start, I have to say, with I followed a memorial service I took my dad to like about 2 years ago. And on the ride back, it was for a distant uncle of ours. We weren't terribly close, but I remember sort of thinking, because my dad doesn't like get into big thoughts that often. He sort of cuts off those. I'm a little more long-winded, as you might have noticed. And we went to this memorial service, and it was not, as it often was, like the person was jammed into a service. This was like about the person, kind of like Helen's service was yesterday. It was really about that person with a few other orchestrated stuff. And after the service started, it was, the service was interspersed with tales of this person's life. And the pervading image from the service was that he was a Christian, was the Christian message was that people should keep themselves open and be prepared to love. Too many mild concussions from football likely keep me from being more specific, given it was 2 years back. But I can tell you that it was a beautiful and simple service. And as we drove, I started to explain to my dad what I really liked about it was it reminded me that Christianity has this focus on love, and even more so than a focus just on love, Christianity has a focus on hope. And as we drove, I started to sort of talk to him about that. I said that Christianity might be the best of all the world religions in telling us that our deepest wishes in the end come true. When you think about it, Christianity says, he doesn't listen to me that often, or didn't listen to me that often. And I proceeded to keep talking, and I went on to tell him that unlike Christianity, Buddhism was at its core not so much about love or hope as it was to me about being mentally disciplined and cautious of being attached to the wrong things and going down those nasty rabbit holes that we can go down to. That it was more about being solid and strong mentally than it was about being hopeful. And that led me to say that, Judaism was as much about cultivating and sustaining one's relationship with one's tradition and one's community, right, and history, as it was even about faith in a singular God. My dad mostly does most of the talking, but in this case, he was actually sitting there. He was at least polite. Feeling I was on a roll, I went on to say that the Islamic tradition was built upon getting our relationship with the larger universe, or as they interpret it from my perspective, God, and getting our perspective right. Elaborating pretty spontaneously, I said that the Islamic tradition was both about a deep religious feeling of security, about being held, and the comforting feeling of being dependent and small, almost in a way that we relate to Father God. It's sort of where the father image comes from, right? Protective father. Given that my dad's eyes weren't completely glazing over, I said something like, Muslims get that our proper understanding of our place in the cosmos leads naturally to a position, and if you think about Muslims, right, they bow, there's a posture of humility in the bowing and of submission. Feeling smart, and my dad shockingly not turning the radio on or twisting the conversation into something about houses or construction or something, I went on to say that I thought Hinduism was the best example of the world's religious traditions that were about tolerance and diversity, and in all the variety of ways that one can attempt to be spiritual. When I got home, I wrote this on an envelope, all of these kind of notes. I didn't want to push my luck with my dad, so I stopped. And I said, Hinduism. Anyway, I got home, and I said that, I started writing the sermon. And the sermon was basically, I remember that Hindus didn't even know they were Hindus until the Brits showed up and basically told them that they were kind of a singular tradition. They taught the people in India that Hinduism was somewhat of a universal thing. Before that, there were just more tribal gods. Anyway, for at least 4 minutes, 2.5 years ago or so, my dad's genuine level of interest seemed to encourage me to think that the sermon on the focusing on the church, on all the traditions, were relevant. So, here's what you got. The Jews, I'll start with them. Feels like our global religious lesson should begin there. For most of us, it was the Jews who famously, if not completely accurately, invented monotheism. So one could say, and certainly they would not be wrong, that it was the Jewish people that first connected us to a singular God. But I think, as I said, the chief lesson is from the Jewish people that their practice is to be connected more importantly than even being a monotheist, was to be loyal to your community, right? Being a Jew is as much about fidelity of remembering one's allegiance and one's history, which was a lot of what we experienced yesterday with Helen, right? We got to reminisce about who we are as a church in a way that we don't normally get to do. And that allegiance to one's tradition, as when they, like you think about Fiddler on the Roof, is an area that, is one can focus on. So, given that the Jewish people are the only group that's identifiably one of the few tribal groups that survived this long, I think it's honorable and it's true that they extend themselves back to their traditions that have kept them together. So let's take a moment of pride as a species that we still have Judaism with us, right? It's one of the few surviving tribal places. And let's see what we can draw out of that in terms of loyalty. So I invite you, for our first lesson today, I invite you to close your eyes for a second. And like a good Jew, I want you to think about finding community, right? Think about community itself. And that lesson is to bind yourself to a people, to a group, to something outside yourself and your family. So with great humility as to how this sounds, but with great tribute, what are you going to be Jewishly loyal about? Take a minute. What are you going to be stuck to, thick and thin, right or wrong, committed to? The word religion in Latin means to bind oneself to something. So in our first exercise in religious pluralism, I want you to ask yourself, who are your chosen people? What are your chosen traditions? What do you identify with? Who is your tribe? Or do you suffer from not really having one? I think this is a particularly important lesson because car companies, those who tell you you should look better, your favorite TV station, all of that is working very hard to smartly win and sustain your loyalty to their aims. So be your own version of Jewish and ask yourself what you're going to be loyal to. Okay, that's the challenge from the Jewish faith. So we get loyal to their God and admittedly jealous and prideful in scriptures, hoisting that God, Yahweh, up above others. Hinduism offers an entirely different vision to me. Hindus get that the magical ways we encounter the essence of the divinity in religion is broad, and there's truth in that too. The Hindus know that what we get out of life and what we need to attend to comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. Hindus get that the diversity of images and energies and forces that move us, they even speak of different spiritual responsibilities at different ages of your life, right? You guys are parenting young kids. That is a stage of your life. It calls you to certain things at each stage. I know I'm painting with too broad a brush here on all these faiths. But to me, when confronted with a systematic problem, theologically, Hindus have the wisdom of simply ignoring it for the most part, and then making up some mythically funky story about a chariot that helps shift the focus. For example, in their creation story, they don't get too bound up in the facts. The universe rests on the back of a giant turtle in their universe story. When asked what that turtle is standing on, the answer is another turtle. And on down more until the questioner gives up. That's a great way to not let theology bind you away from your spiritual path. In my opinion, Hinduism offers up spiritual flexibility, which we all need, not unlike the Catholic saints do, that tells us that there's always a little manifestation of the holy to be found. Hinduism, in its diversity, from the bendy practices of yoga to the being charitable way to get to heaven, to the being faithful and mental about your approach, it tells you that you can do this in your own way. You can be spiritual in your own way. Hindus don't disdain one another. They don't care whether you follow Kali or Ganesh, the city of good luck, and the city god of Mumbai, or both. Hinduism says different strokes for different folks. India is a cacophony of sights and sounds, and Hinduism is like it, a melange of religious styles and things. So in the spirit of being a good Hindu, how are you going to be a good Hindu? Are you going to pick up all the ways that your spirit gets moved? Be they in prayer, be they in service to the community, be they when you're watching a sporting event or a Broadway show or listening to music. What diversity are you going to let get inside of you and move you? Because Hindus tell you you're only a temporary thing anyway. So just chill out. Find some ways to be deep. Find some ways to be the best you. That's a ridiculously broad brush version of Hinduism. I get it, of course. So what blessings and colors are missing from your life? What ways are you keeping yourself from experiencing joy, God, and the eternal? Buddhism. While we're hanging out in Southeast Asia, we might as well deal with Buddhism here. It makes sense. Hindus offer us this lesson similar to Buddhist ones in a way. Buddhism share the cultural soil of India. Buddhism, being born in northern India, arrives out of the same geography that they're together. They're almost siblings. If anybody ever tells you that all religions basically say the same thing, you might remember that for much of the Western world, in the afterlife, we graduate to a more perfect version of ourselves and a more perfect world in which our spirits can live in. That's very different, albeit equally pleasant version of the afterlife that Hindus and Buddhists give us. See, in the West, we think about reincarnation. We think we get cycled back, right? We think about what we might get cycled back in the form of, which isn't entirely inaccurate. But the missing point is that we're on that journey to purify ourselves. You cycle back because you don't exist as a thing of importance. You're really much part of a larger system. Buddhists will tell you that there really is no single self that's just you. That's why one of the prerequisites in Buddhism is that you lose your ego to a large degree. Because you're primarily not you. You're a deeper, more eternal thing. You're a constantly changing set of cells, Buddhism tells us, a shifting, ever-changing collection of memories that are coming in and out, an accumulating, changing set of relationships, right? What was important to you as a fourth grader is not important to you now. Thich Nhat Hanh says, what we thought to be success, what we thought to be the basis of a happy life, when you evolve, you don't need it anymore because your happiness is already there in an ultimate dimension that extends beyond the successes and failures of this moment. So I'll ask you Buddhism's great question to all of us in the most pragmatic terms. What are you too attached to in this life, in your life now? What ideas are you trapped by that aren't serving your higher, less ego-driven self? Take a minute. What ideas need to be shed? That's the lesson I think Buddhism offers us. Islam. Do you remember being a kid? Up on your dad's shoulders? Maybe you had that experience. Or being tucked in, right? It's hard for Westerners committed to our individuality and proud of our humanity's achievements, right, and all the great things that we've been able to do, not to talk about the submission that Islam asks of its followers, not to get into some dark or sexually overtones of it all, but being under God to the pre-Muslim Arabs who worship competing gods and regional deities, local gods and warlords that fought with one another, being united was liberating for them. For Muslims, that cultural shift proved empowering, that in a couple of centuries, along with some exchange and some spreading of commercialism, that idea of a single God to them and being under that God spread thousands of miles from the Arabian Peninsula all over a huge, vast of area in just 2 centuries. Muslims' real gift is knowing our finiteness to the broader universe and to God, and knowing our place. You might not love all that Islam is about, and it's obviously about a lot more than that, but they do have a perspective. You are small, and you are part of a much larger thing. So, similar to the question posed by the Jewish tradition, I ask you this: what are you comfortable living under, being a part of, and what does your life ask you to submit to? And what do you want it to? What higher calling, what higher purpose do you wish to live under? I like to close with the words we used in the children's moment. Words from Rumi, but in the mind or voice of God. I've given each being a separate, unique way of seeing and knowing and saying that knowledge is and what it is. What seems right for him or them, what is poisonous to one is honey to someone else. Purity and impurity, sloth and diligence in worship, they mean nothing to me. I am a part of all of that. Ways of worshiping are not to be ranked as either better or worse than one another. Hindus do Hindu things. Muslims in India do what they do. It's all praise. It's all right. It's not me that's glorified in acts of worship. It's the worshipers. Perhaps the lesson for us in this is expect to make in your own life for all or most of these parts. Build a religious life that has rules for yourself, some fences, a few do's and don'ts that you've chosen to honor. Build a religious spiritual life that involves some community, some like-minded camaraderie. Does your life have any routine images or art that are meaningful to you, that stimulate your mind and your soul? Does it have physical acts of discipline like yoga or even walking outside in nature? Some ritual acts of reflection, reading, meditation, books on tape, the Bible, prayer, whatever. Does it have some community? Does it have some intimacy? Does your faith have some hopes and dreams, like ending poverty, that call you? Does it dedicate you and call you to be dedicated to service to others? Does it have some commitment to moderation? All of these things are part of the spiritual path. And I think we can look broad and far for the lessons. Amen. It's now time for our offertory and another fictitious story from me. So Jesus came upon a small crowd who surrounded a woman who they believed to be an adulteress, right? This is a biblical story. They were preparing to stone her to death, which was in the rules of the Jewish tradition. To calm the situation, Jesus said, you've heard this, "Whoever is without sin among you, let them cast the first stone." Suddenly, an older lady at the back of the crowd picked up a fairly large rock and lobbed it at the young woman, scoring a direct hit on her head. The unfortunate young woman collapsed dead on the spot. Jesus looked over towards the older lady and sighed, "Come on, Ma, work with me." We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing words come from Carl Sandburg. Though our temporary lives, through it, the great currents of history run, let us keep the channels open and free, not to obstruct greater purposes than our own. And let our minds set upon the high goals here that bind us into one sharing fellowship of loving hearts. May that be so. Amen. Go in peace. Be peace. Thanks for being here.